Tom Henderson wiped the sweat from his forehead as he surveyed his struggling cattle ranch in the Arizona desert. The morning sun was already blazing hot, and it wasn't even 9 o'clock yet. His weathered hands gripped a fence post he'd been trying to repair for the third time this month. Everything seemed to be falling apart at once, and he was running out of both money and hope. The ranch had been in his family for 3 generations, passed down from his grandfather who'd built it from nothing back in the 1920s. Now, at 52 years old, Tom was facing the real possibility that he might be the last Henderson to work this land. The drought had been brutal for 2 straight years, feed costs were through the roof, and he'd already had to sell off half his herd just to pay the mortgage. His wife, Sarah, had passed away 3 years ago from cancer, and their only son lived in Phoenix, working as a computer programmer with no interest in ranch life. Tom couldn't blame him, really. The ranch life was hard, lonely, and increasingly unprofitable. Most days, Tom felt like he was just postponing the inevitable dot as he hammered another nail into the stubborn fence post. He heard the rumble of a pickup truck coming down his long dirt driveway. Visitors were rare out here, 20 miles from the nearest town. He shielded his eyes from the sun and watched as an old blue Ford pickup, probably from the early 2000s, made its way toward his house. The truck pulled up near the barn, and Tom walked over to greet whoever had come calling. The driver was a middle-aged Hispanic man named Carlos, whom Tom recognized from town. Carlos worked various odd jobs and sometimes helped ranchers during busy seasons. But it wasn't Carlos who caught Tom's attention as the truck doors opened. 2 women stepped out of the passenger side, and Tom had to do a double take. Both women were exceptionally tall, probably close to 6 feet each, with long black hair and strong athletic builds. They moved with a quiet confidence that immediately commanded respect. Their clothes were simple but practical work clothes, jeans and long-sleeve shirts despite the heat. Carlos walked over with a friendly wave. "Morning, Tom. Hope you don't mind us stopping by. I've got Maria and Elena here looking for ranch work. They're sisters, and they know cattle and horses better than most men I've met." The taller of the 2 women, who must have been Maria, stepped forward and extended her hand to Tom. Her grip was firm and calloused from hard work. "Mr. Henderson, we heard you might need help around here. We're willing to work hard for fair wages." Tom was struck by her direct manner of speaking. There was no hesitation or uncertainty in her voice. Elena, standing just behind her sister, nodded in agreement but let Maria do the talking. "Well, I appreciate you coming by," Tom said, still a bit surprised by the unexpected visitors. "Can I ask where you've worked before?" Maria's dark eyes met his steadily. "We grew up on the San Carlos Reservation about 2 hours north of here. Our family has been raising cattle and horses for generations. We worked on our uncle's ranch until he passed last year. Since then, we've been doing day work wherever we can find it." Tom knew the San Carlos Reservation. It was Apache land, and the people there had a well-deserved reputation for being excellent with livestock. Still, he hesitated. It wasn't that he had any problem with their heritage, it was just that he was barely making ends meet as it was. "I'll be honest with you, ladies," Tom said, removing his worn baseball cap and running his hand through his graying hair. "I'm not in the best financial shape right now. I can't afford to pay much, and I can't guarantee steady work." Elena spoke for the first time, her voice quieter than her sister's but equally confident. "What can you afford?" Tom thought about his bank account and the bills piling up on his kitchen table. "I could probably manage $200 a week each, if that's not insulting. It's all I can swing right now." Carlos whistled low. "Tom, that's pretty low, even for around here." But Maria held up her hand to stop Carlos from protesting further. She looked at Elena, and some unspoken communication passed between the sisters. Elena gave an almost imperceptible nod. "We'll take it," Maria said simply. "When can we start?" Tom was taken aback by their quick acceptance. Most experienced ranch hands would laugh at such low wages. "Are you sure?" "Like I said, it's not much money." "We need work, and you need help," Maria replied matter-of-factly. "Sometimes that's how things work out?" Carlos shook his head with a grin. "Well, if everyone's happy, I guess I'll leave you to work out the details." I've got to get to another job. He looked at the sisters. You sure you don't want me to come back and pick you up later? We'll figure out our own transportation, Elena said. Thank you for bringing us out here, Carlos. After Carlos drove away in a cloud of dust, Tom found himself alone with the two Apache women. He gestured toward the ranch house, a modest, single-story building that had seen better days. Well, I guess we should talk about what kind of work needs doing. Would you like some coffee or water before we start? Water would be good, Maria said. It's going to be a hot one today. As they walked toward the house, Tom couldn't help but notice how the sisters moved. They walked with purpose, their eyes constantly scanning the surroundings, taking in details about the ranch, the condition of the buildings, the lay of the land. It reminded him of how his grandfather used to move around the ranch, always observing, always thinking, inside the simple kitchen. Tom poured 3 glasses of cold water from a pitcher in the refrigerator. The kitchen was clean but sparse, clearly the domain of a man living alone. A few dishes sat in the drying rack, and the morning's newspaper lay folded on the small table. So, Tom said, settling into one of the wooden chairs, what kind of experience do you have with cattle specifically? Maria took a long drink of water before answering. We can do everything. Branding, vaccinations, birthing assistance, fence repair, hay cutting. Elena is especially good with horses. She has a way with animals that most people don't. Elena smiled slightly at her sister's praise but remained quiet, seeming content to let Maria handle the conversation. We also know about the land, Maria continued. Water sources, best grazing areas, weather patterns. Our grandfather taught us to read the signs in nature that tell you what's coming. Tom was impressed, despite himself. These weren't just women looking for any job. They were true ranch hands with deep knowledge. How long were you planning to stay? I mean, if things work out. As long as you need us and can use us, Maria said. We're not just passing through, Mr. Henderson. We're looking for a place to settle and work. Please call me Tom. Mr. Henderson was my father. He paused, considering his next words carefully. I should probably mention that I live alone out here. My wife passed a few years back and my son lives in the city. I don't want there to be any awkwardness or misunderstandings. Elena spoke up again. We're here to work, Tom. Nothing more, nothing less. Her directness was refreshing. Tom had worried about potential complications, but these women clearly had no interest in anything beyond honest work. All right then, Tom said, standing up. Let me show you around the place and we can figure out where to start. They spent the next hour walking the ranch. Tom pointed out the main herd of about 60 head of cattle, the hay barn that was only half full, the equipment shed with its collection of aging but functional machinery, and the various fenced pastures that made up his property. Maria and Elena asked thoughtful questions about everything they saw. How long since the wells had been checked? When was the last time the cattle had been rotated to fresh pasture? What was his breeding program like? Their questions revealed a depth of knowledge that impressed Tom more with each passing minute. When they reached the horse corral, Elena's whole demeanor changed. Tom had 4 horses, 2 for riding and 2 older ones that were mostly retired. As soon as Elena approached the fence, the horses came over to investigate. Within minutes, she was stroking their necks and speaking to them in what Tom assumed was Apache, her voice soft and melodic. She's always been like that, Maria said, watching her sister with obvious affection. Animals trust her immediately. That's a valuable skill on a ranch, Tom observed as they walked back toward the house. Maria suddenly stopped and pointed toward a section of fence about 100 yards away. You've got cattle getting through over there. See how the grass is trampled? And there are fresh tracks leading toward that draw. Tom squinted in the direction she was pointing. He could barely make out what she was talking about. But when they walked closer, sure enough, there was a section where the wire was loose and several steers had pushed through to reach some green grass growing near a seasonal creek bed. I've been looking for where they were getting through for 2 weeks, Tom admitted. How did you spot that so quickly? You learned to see the signs, Maria said simply. My grandfather always said the land talks to you if you know how to listen. As the morning progressed, Tom found himself more and more impressed with both women. They worked with a quiet efficiency that reminded him of the best ranch hands he'd ever employed. More than that, they seemed to genuinely understand not just the work, but the underlying rhythms and patterns of ranch life. By noon, they had repaired the fence break, checked and repaired 2 other weak spots Maria had identified, and helped Tom move some hay bales that had been sitting in his truck for 3 days. 3 weeks had passed since Maria and Elena began working at the Henderson Ranch, and Tom could hardly believe the transformation. What had once felt like an impossible daily struggle now seemed manageable, even hopeful. The sisters arrived every morning just as the sun painted the eastern mountains in soft gold, and they worked with a dedication and skill that amazed him. More each day, the ranch was beginning to look like something Tom could be proud of again. Fences that had been held together with prayers and baling wire were now properly repaired. The cattle were healthier and better organized, rotated through pastures according to a grazing plan that Maria had suggested based on seasonal weather patterns her grandfather had taught her. Even the horses seemed happier, especially since Elena had begun working with them regularly, but it wasn't just the physical improvements that had lifted Tom's spirits. Having people to work alongside, to share coffee with in the morning, and to discuss the day's plans with had reminded him of what he'd been missing during his years of solitude. Maria and Elena brought a quiet intelligence and wisdom to everything they did that made even mundane tasks more meaningful. Still, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that there was something the sisters weren't telling him. Sometimes he caught them in quiet conversations that stopped when he approached. Other times, he noticed them looking off toward the northern part of his property with expressions he couldn't quite read. It wasn't suspicious exactly, but it was something. On this particular Thursday morning, Tom was fixing a water pump in the equipment shed when he heard Elena talking to one of the horses in the corral nearby. He'd grown accustomed to her habit of speaking to the animals in Apache, but this time something in her tone caught his attention. She sounded almost urgent, like she was trying to calm a frightened animal. Tom walked to the door of the shed and looked out. Elena was standing beside Dusty, his oldest and most gentle mare, stroking her neck while speaking in low, soothing tones. But Dusty didn't look distressed at all. In fact, she looked perfectly content, as she always did around Elena. "Everything all right out there?" Tom called. Elena looked up with a slight smile. "She's fine." "Just telling her about the weather change coming?" Tom looked up at the clear blue sky. There wasn't a cloud in sight. "Weather change. Storm coming tomorrow night. The animals always know before we do." Tom had learned to trust Elena's instincts about many things, but weather predictions seemed like a stretch. Still, she hadn't been wrong about much of anything since she'd started working for him. Maria emerged from the barn carrying a bucket of oats. "Tom, we need to talk to you about something important." There was a seriousness in her voice that Tom hadn't heard before. He set down the wrench he'd been using and gave her his full attention. "What's on your mind?" Maria glanced at Elena, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Not out here. Can we sit down inside?" Tom's curiosity was now thoroughly aroused, but he simply nodded and led them toward the house. In the kitchen, he poured 3 cups of coffee while the sisters settled themselves at the small table. Maria's usual confident demeanor seemed slightly strained, and Elena was quieter than usual, if that was possible. "Tom," Maria began, then paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "We haven't been completely honest with you about why we wanted to work here." Tom felt a knot form in his stomach. Had he been naive to trust them so quickly? "Go on, it's nothing bad," Elena said quickly, apparently reading the concern on his face. "It's just complicated." Maria leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. "Our family has been looking for a particular piece of land for a long time. Land that's sacred to our people, that was taken from us over 100 years ago." "Okay," Tom said slowly, not sure where this was headed. "Part of that land is on your ranch," Maria continued. "The northern section where that old oak grove is near the seasonal creek?" Tom knew the spot she meant. It was a beautiful area, maybe 20 acres of his least productive land where a spring-fed creek created a small oasis in the desert. Ancient oak trees provided shade, and the grass grew green even in the driest weather. He'd always wondered why that particular spot stayed so lush when everything around it struggled. What makes it sacred? Tom asked. Elena spoke up. Our ancestors are buried there. It was a winter camp for our people for thousands of years. The spring never runs dry, even in the worst droughts, because it's connected to something deeper than just groundwater. The government relocated our people in the 1870s, Maria continued. They promised our land would be protected, but then they sold it to white settlers anyway. Your great-grandfather bought it legally, but that doesn't change what it means to our people. Tom sat back in his chair, absorbing this information. He'd known his great-grandfather had purchased large tracts of land from the government, but he'd never thought about what might have been there before. What are you asking me for? He said finally. The sisters exchanged another of their meaningful glances before Maria answered. We want to buy that section from you. Buy it? Tom was surprised. He'd been expecting a request for access or permission to visit. 20 acres, Elena said. We've been saving money for years. We can offer you $50,000 cash. Tom nearly choked on his coffee. $50,000 would solve most of his immediate financial problems and then some. But something about the offer bothered him. That's more than that land is worth agriculturally, he said. It's worth that to us, Maria replied simply. Tom stood up and walked to the window, looking out toward the northern part of his ranch. The oak grove was visible in the distance, a dark green patch against the brown desert landscape. Can I ask why you didn't just tell me this from the beginning? Would you have hired us if we had? Elena asked. Tom considered this. Honestly, he probably would have been suspicious of their motives. But now, after working with them for 3 weeks, he knew they were good people with genuine intentions. I might have, he said. But I understand why you didn't want to take that chance. He turned back to face them. Can I think about this? It's a big decision. Of course, Maria said. We wouldn't expect an answer right away. Can I ask you something else? Why is buying it so important? Why not just ask for permission to visit? Elena's expression grew sad. Because we need to protect it. There are people who would destroy what's there if they knew about it. Developers, treasure hunters, people who don't understand what they're messing with. What's there to destroy? Graves, Maria said quietly. Medicine wheels. Sacred pools. Things that have been undisturbed for over a century because your family has left that area alone. But you won't live forever, Tom. What happens to that land when you're gone? The question hit Tom harder than he'd expected. He had no children interested in ranching, and he'd been avoiding thinking about what would happen to the ranch after his death. I don't know, he admitted. If we own it, we can make sure it stays protected forever, Elena said. We can bring our children there to learn about their heritage. We can take care of the graves of our ancestors. Tom found himself deeply moved by the passion in her voice. He thought about his own family's graves in the small cemetery in town, how important it was to him that they were maintained and respected. I understand, he said. I really do. Let me think about it, okay? Thank you, Maria said. That's all we can ask. The rest of the day passed normally, but Tom found his attention wandering to the oak grove repeatedly. That evening, after the sisters had gone home, he decided to take a closer look at the area they'd described. He saddled up Ranger, his favorite riding horse, and headed north as the sun began to set. The ride to the oak grove took about 20 minutes, and as he approached, Tom began to notice details he'd never paid attention to before. There were faint but distinct paths leading through the trees, worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. The spring that fed the creek bubbled up from between large stones that seemed to be arranged too deliberately to be natural. And in several clearings he could make out circular patterns of stones, partly covered by decades of fallen leaves. Tom dismounted and walked carefully through the grove, looking more closely at everything around him. Near the largest oak tree, he found what was unmistakably a grave marker, a simple stone, cairn that had been carefully maintained despite its obvious age. As darkness fell, Tom made his way back to the ranch house, his mind spinning with new understanding. This wasn't just land to Maria and Elena's people, it was a sacred place where their ancestors rested, where their history lived. The next morning, the sisters arrived to find Tom waiting with coffee already made and a serious expression on his face. "I rode out to the oak grove last night," he said without preamble. Maria tensed slightly. "And?" "I saw the graves, the stone circles, the spring." Tom paused, choosing his words carefully. "I understand now why this is so important to you." Elena relaxed visibly. "We hoped you would. I have some questions, though. If I sell you that land, what happens to our working arrangement? Are you planning to quit and move on?" "No," Maria said immediately. "We'd like to keep working for you, if you'll have us. This ranch has become important to us, too, not just that one section." "And the $50,000, where did that come from?" "Savings from years of work," Elena replied. "Money from the sale of our uncle's ranch after H." Friday evening came with the desert sunset painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and purple. Tom had spent the entire day wondering what Maria and Elena wanted to discuss with him. Their promise to cook dinner and explain everything had left him both curious and slightly nervous. He'd finished his evening chores early and taken extra care with his appearance, even putting on a clean shirt instead of his usual work clothes. As he walked toward the house, he could smell something delicious wafting from the kitchen windows. Inside, he found the sisters bustling around his kitchen with the comfortable efficiency they brought to everything they did. Elena was tending something on the stove that smelled like a combination of chili peppers and slow-cooked meat, while Maria was setting the table with dishes Tom hadn't used since Sarah's funeral dinner 3 years ago. "Smells incredible in here," Tom said, genuinely impressed. "Traditional Apache stew," Elena said with a shy smile. "My grandmother's recipe? We brought everything from home." "And fresh bread," Maria added, pulling a golden loaf from Tom's oven. "We thought you deserved a proper meal before we talked." As they sat down to eat, Tom was struck by how natural this felt. The conversation flowed easily, covering everything from the cattle market to Elena's observations about the horses to Maria's predictions about the coming winter weather. For a while, it was easy to forget that this dinner had any purpose beyond simple friendship. The food was extraordinary. The stew was rich and complex, with flavors Tom had never experienced before, and the bread was perfectly crusty on the outside and soft within. Even the simple salad Maria had prepared seemed to taste better than anything Tom had eaten in months. "This is amazing," Tom said as he helped himself to a second serving of stew. "Thank you for going to all this trouble." "It's not trouble," Elena replied. "Cooking for people we care about is never trouble." After dinner, they moved to Tom's small living room. The sisters sat on the old couch while Tom settled into his recliner, the same chair where he'd spent countless lonely evenings since Sarah's death. But tonight, the room felt warm and alive in a way it hadn't for years. Maria took a deep breath and began. "Tom, we want to ask you something that might sound crazy at first, but we hope you'll hear us out completely before you decide." "I'm listening," Tom said, settling back in his chair. "Our community on the reservation is facing some serious challenges," Elena said. "Young people are leaving for the cities because there aren't enough opportunities at home. We're losing our connection to the traditional ways of life that sustained our people for thousands of years. At the same time," Maria continued, "we have knowledge and skills that are disappearing. Knowledge about sustainable agriculture, about reading weather patterns, about managing livestock in desert conditions. Things that could benefit everyone, not just our people." Tom nodded, following their logic but not yet seeing where it was leading. "We've been working with some people from the university and from the State Agricultural Extension Service," Elena said. "There's a growing interest in traditional farming and ranching methods, especially as climate change makes conventional approaches less reliable." "What we're thinking," Maria said, leaning forward with growing enthusiasm, "is creating something new here. Something that preserves our traditions while also providing economic opportunities for our young people." "What exactly are you proposing?" Tom asked. Elena stood up and walked to the window. looking out toward the northern part of the ranch where the oak grove lay hidden in darkness. "We want to ask if you'd consider partnering with us to create a cultural education and sustainable agriculture center here on your ranch." Tom felt his eyebrows rise in surprise. This was definitely not what he'd been expecting. "It would work like this," Maria continued. "You would maintain ownership of your ranch and continue raising cattle. But we would bring in young people from our community to learn traditional skills alongside modern ranching techniques. They would work the land, learn about both cultures, and help make your ranch more profitable. We've already talked to several families who would be interested in sending their children for a program like this," Elena added. "Young men and women who want to learn about agriculture but also want to stay connected to their heritage." Tom was struggling to process the scope of what they were suggesting. "This sounds like it would require a lot of infrastructure, organization, funding." "We've been working on this for 2 years," Maria said. "We have commitments for grant money from 3 different sources, including the State Agricultural Department and a federal program for preserving indigenous knowledge. We also have a partnership with the university that would bring in students and researchers." Elena returned to the couch and pulled out a folder Tom hadn't noticed before. "We have detailed plans, budgets, letters of support. We didn't want to approach you with just a dream. We wanted to show you that this could really work." Tom accepted the folder and began leafing through the documents inside. What he saw was remarkable, detailed architectural plans for housing and classroom facilities, financial projections showing how the program could become self-supporting, letters from university professors and government officials expressing enthusiastic support. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked, amazed by the thoroughness of their preparation. "Like I said, 2 years," Maria replied. "But we've been looking for the right location for much longer than that. We needed someone who understood the land, who respected both traditional and modern approaches, and who would be willing to work with us as true partners." "Why me? Why this ranch?" Elena smiled. "Because in 6 weeks of working with you, we've learned that you're exactly the kind of person we hope to find. You're knowledgeable, fair, open-minded, and you genuinely care about the land and the animals. Plus," Maria added with a grin, "you need help making this ranch profitable, and we need a place to build our program. It's a natural partnership." Tom continued reading through the documents, growing more impressed with each page. The program they were proposing would bring in 12 to 15 young people at a time for 6-month intensive courses. They would live in dormitory-style housing built on currently unused portions of the ranch, work alongside experienced ranchers and farmers, and learn everything from traditional horsemanship to modern veterinary techniques. The students would provide labor, Elena explained as Tom read. But they'd also pay tuition, and the program would receive ongoing funding from multiple sources. "According to our projections, your ranch income could increase by 60% within 3 years." "And the cultural preservation aspect?" Tom asked. "That's where the sacred grove comes in," Maria said. "With your permission, we would use that area for traditional ceremonies and teachings. Students would learn about Apache history and culture alongside practical skills. It would be a place where our elders could pass on knowledge that's been handed down for generations." Tom set down the folder and looked at both women carefully. "This is a huge undertaking. Are you sure you want to tie your futures to this place, to working with an old rancher like me?" "Tom," Elena said seriously, "in the few weeks we've worked for you, this ranch has started to feel like home in a way nowhere has since we left our uncle's place. You've treated us with respect and fairness from the first day. You agreed to sell us the sacred grove even though you could have made more money keeping it. You're exactly the kind of partner we want for this project. Besides," Maria added, "you're not that old and you have years of good work left in you. This program would give you help managing the ranch, additional income, and the satisfaction of knowing you're making a difference in young people's lives." Tom stood up and walked to the window where Elena had stood earlier. In the distance, he could see a few lights from the reservation, small pinpoints in the vast darkness of the desert. He thought about his own grandfather, who had built this ranch with determination and vision, and about his father, who had expanded and improved it through decades of hard work. What would my role be in all this? He asked. Ranch manager and primary instructor for livestock management, Maria replied. You would teach students everything you know about raising cattle, managing pastures, maintaining equipment, reading weather patterns. Your knowledge would be just as valuable as our traditional teachings. And you too? Program coordinators and cultural instructors, Elena said. Maria would handle the business side and teach about traditional agriculture. I would work with the horses and teach about animal husbandry from an Apache perspective. Tom turned back to face them. How soon would this start? If you agree, we could begin construction this fall and welcome our first students next spring, Maria said. We already have a waiting list of young people who want to participate. And if I say no? The sisters looked at each other sadly before Elena answered. Then we'll keep looking for another location. But honestly, Tom, we've been searching for 2 years and haven't found anywhere that feels as right as this place does. Tom walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. The magnitude of what they were proposing was overwhelming, but as he thought about it, he realized how much it appealed to him. The ranch would be busy and productive again. He would have purpose beyond just daily survival. Most importantly, he would